Urayum uppagam kanbar, ule vindru thara tu yindru pavir. There can be no doubt that history will not deny the Indians' contribution to the development and prosperity of Britain's colonial empire in the 19th century. Despite being separated from their motherland, Indians proved to be hardy pioneers. They triumphed over all adversities, such as the hazards of the indentured system and the hostility of nature and oppression of the white man. This picture of adversity and triumph can seldom be equaled anywhere in the world. For the average rural inhabitant, the emigration process was a cumbersome, time-consuming and nerve-wracking experience. During the 1850s and the 1860s, the traveling conditions on the passenger ships that conveyed indentured Indians were on the whole deplorable. The early voyages of Indian indentured laborers traveling from India to Natal were a terrible ordeal. The ships which brought the early Indian settlers to Natal were old, leaky, and utterly ill-equipped to transport people in such large numbers. But the voyage of the Belvedere, which was the second ship to arrive in Natal, has to be reckoned amongst the worst. One can only surmise that the state of the Belvedere's passengers, almost dead with the sheer exhaustion of their 54 days at sea and drained of practically all spiritual reserves, they probably did not even have the strength to regret their coming. The voyages were generally long and arduous and characterized by illness, disease, and death, factors often precipitated by tropical conditions, overcrowding, and poor medical tests prior to embarkation. The Belvedere left Calcutta on October 4, 1860, and the Truro left Madras on 11 October 1860. The Truro reached Durban first and dropped anchor on Friday, 16 November 1860. On that memorable day, 341 Indians disembarked from the Truro onto South African soil for the first time. Upon arrival at the Durban docks, the 341 laborers were immediately taken to a holding place known as a Lazaretto, where they were quarantined for 7 days. At 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning, November 21, 1860, an immigration agent by the name of Edmund Tatham visited the barracks for the purpose of locating Indians to the various planters and householders who had applied for them. They were paraded before potential farmers, which was a great and dignifying process. Although the farmers tried as far as possible to keep the families together, Indians were still bought like horse or cattle of the time. One of the contractual agreements was that there should be at least 40% of women for every shipload of men. 19% of the first shipload of immigrants were Christian and 16% Muslim. The rest was South Indian Hindus. The indentured Indian lost no time. With a pent-up enthusiasm and determination to succeed, the Indians became prolific farmers and were an integral part of the economy of Natal. The Indians, with their industrious habits and comparatively few wants, did remarkably well as cultivators. In numerous localities, they converted waste and unproductive land into well-kept gardens. The terms of the indentured Indian contracts were seldom observed, and employers were guilty of improper stoppage of wages and supplying unsatisfactory rations. Growing numbers of sugar farmers, the mines, the railways, and even some white employees were subjecting Indian laborers to exploitation, degradation, and cheating. All in all, the period of indentured laborers in South Africa was one of broken promises, disillusionment, and total unhappiness. After 10 years' residence in Natal in 1870, only 411 Indians decided to return to India in terms of the free passage arrangements. The 1860 settlers laid the foundation of education for the Indians in South Africa in an attempt to avoid losing out on justice as a result of ignorance. Looking at South African politics and the movement to get rid of apartheid, oppression, and Calabar, a large percentage of the credit goes to Mahatma Gandhi. In 1911, India gave South Africa Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, an expatriate lawyer. Upon reaching South Africa, however, Gandhi transformed into a politician who sowed the first seeds of protest politics in this country against injustices. He was the pioneer of Satyagraha, a resistance to tyranny through mass civil disobedience, firmly founded on total non-violence, which inspired movements of civil rights and freedom across the world. The government offered Indians the South African Indian Council, made up of hand-picked men who would form the council ostensibly to look after the Indian community. Under the council came such matters as Indian education, the University Act, along with some allowances and recognition in certain trades. The most noteworthy effort by the Indians for the Indians was the initiation of Sastri College in 1931. Sastri College became the death knell in white supremacy, as it afforded the educational emancipation of Indian women. The initiative, vision, and forward thinking of the Indian helped him to exploit the Indian Council, allowing for stable education. In 1960, 100 years after the first Indians set foot on South African soil, the South African government granted citizenship to Indians. Indians transcended from indentureship to entrepreneurship with the establishment of the Universal Printing Press in the 1900s. Some 30 to 40 years later, they blossomed into leaders of the flower industry and from there developed into markets. Parallel to this was the emergence of the Indian merchant community. 2010 marks the 150-year celebration of cultural and traditional treasures brought to South Africa from India. There is no justification in the belief that the South African sugar industry alone was responsible for the importation of Indian labor into Natal. South African Indians of today may be a well-educated and technologically advanced community, but through this time have lost some of the humanitarian and spiritual values which were present in 1860. This is a time for us to reflect on our early heritage and think about the future direction of our cultural, spiritual, and humanitarian values. Vasudevaya Kutumbam. Unity of the family is the success of society.